Good evening. My name is Melissa Williams, and I serve as the president of the Washington County Board of Education. Welcome to members of the Board of Education, the superintendent, staff, and the community to the Board of Education's public business meeting. Everyone is participating in this meeting using a telephone or an electronic device. It has always been the practice of the Washington County Board of Education to meet in person and to invite members of the public to the board's meetings. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, certain legal directives, and the need to safeguard the health of the community, it is necessary to participate in this public meeting by phone or an electronic device. This evening's business meeting will be recorded, and the public may access the public meeting now on Channel 99, Facebook, and on WCPS's website. The public comment portion of the meeting will not take place. The Board of Education encourages the public to submit their comments in writing to boe@wcps.k12.md.us, and this information will be distributed to board members and the superintendent. At this time, I call to order the public business meeting of the Washington County Board of Education. Dr. Bishop, would you please call the roll so that we may determine if we have a quorum of board members present?
Mr. Bickford?
Here.
Mrs. Fisher?
Here.
Mrs. Murray?
Here.
Mr. Ridenauer? Mr. Stauffer?
Present.
And Mrs. Williams?
Here.
And Mr. Mackley?
Here.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. We have 5 board members present and our student representative, so I do declare that we have a quorum of board members present. At this time, I'd like to call on Vice President Stan Stauffer to offer the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Stauffer. Our first item of business is to approve this evening's agenda. Is there a motion?
Madam President, it's Mrs. Fisher. I move for approval of this evening's agenda.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Is there a second?
Second, Mrs. Murray.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray. Is there any discussion?
I have an amendment to the agenda.
Yes, Mr. Bickford.
Under new business, we have several items, 14 items separated, and I think we can combine most of them into a consent agenda. So the motion would be to amend the agenda to combine items under new business, those items 1 through 8 and 11 through 14 into a consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Bickford. Is there a second to Mr. Bickford's amendment?
Second, Mrs. Murray.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray. Is there any discussion of the amendment that Mr. Bickford has offered? Okay, hearing none. Dr. Bishop, would you please call the roll for the vote?
Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mrs. Murray,
Aye.
Mr. Stauffer,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Bickford,
Aye.
and Mr. Mackley.
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. I have 5 affirmative votes to amend, to amend the agenda. And the student member concurs. So now we'll have a vote on the amended agenda. Dr. Bishop, would you call the roll, please?
Yeah. Mrs. Murray,
Aye.
Mr. Stauffer,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Bickford,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
and Mr. Mackley.
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. I have 5 affirmative votes with the student member concurring to approve the amended agenda. If there is no objection, and by unanimous consent, I would like to add a second item under miscellaneous business. And that item would be the appointment to the MABE Legal Service Association Board. Is there any discussion, any objection to doing so? Okay, hearing none, we'll add that as item number 2 under miscellaneous business. At this time, we'll move to approval of the minutes.
Mrs. Williams, I move to approve the work session minutes dated Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray. Is there a second?
Mrs.
Second,
Fisher,
Mr.
second.
Bickford.
Thank you, Mr. Bickford. I think you beat Mrs. Fisher to the draw. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes of the work session of June 2nd? Hearing none, Dr. Bishop, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Stauffer,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Bickford,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mrs. Murray,
Aye.
Mr. Mackley.
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. I have 5 affirmative votes with the student member concurring, so the work session minutes of June 2nd are approved.
Mrs. Williams, I move to approve the closed session minutes dated Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray. Is there a second?
Mr.
Is there a
Bickford, second.
second? Go ahead, Mr. Bickford.
I second.
Thank you. Excuse me. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes of the closed session of June 2nd? Hearing none, Dr. Bishop, would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Bickford,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mrs. Murray,
Aye.
Mr. Stauffer.
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. I have 5 affirmative votes, so the minutes of the closed session meeting of June 2nd have been approved.
Mrs. Williams, I move to approve the business meeting minutes dated Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray. Is there a second?
Mrs. Fisher seconds.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Are there any additions or corrections to the business meeting minutes of June 2nd? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the vote. Dr. Bishop, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Bickford,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. Murray, Mrs. Murray, I apologize, Mrs. Murray,
That's fine. Aye.
Mr. Stauffer,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Mackley.
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. I have 5 affirmative votes with the student member concurring, and we now have approval of the business meeting minutes dated June 2nd. Thank you. As mentioned earlier, we will not be having public comment during this meeting. However, the Board of Education encourages the public to submit their comments in writing to boe@wcps.k12.md.us. We're going to move right to new business as we have no old business to conduct this evening.
Mrs. Williams, this is Dr. Michael.
Yes, sir.
I think if I heard the amended agenda correctly, I think the amendment was to do a consent agenda on items 1 through 14, not including 9 and 10. I think you'll need to amend the agenda again. I think your intent was to include all consent items for purchase other than 9 and 10, which would be 1 through 8 and 11 and 12, but not 13 and 14. 13 and 14 are the Educational Master Plan and the Food Nutrition Service Plan. So I'd like to suggest you go back and amend the agenda again, or we could do all the purchase items, vote on 9 and 10 separately, do the EFMP and do the food services, but you'd have kind of a convoluted vote.
Okay, so looking back at my notes, I have Peter's amendment as combining into a consent agenda items 1 through 8 and items 11 through 14.
So what that second
And
part,
you're saying that 13 and 14 should not be
correct, they're totally different. They're not purchases. 13 is
correct.
the Educational Master Plan and 14 is the food service budget. So I think you want it to be 1 through 8 and 11 and 12, or however you'd like to word it.
Okay,
I'm happy to
Thank
make,
you.
I'm happy to make
thank
the
you,
motion.
Dr. Michael. Mr. Bickford, would you like to make a new motion to amend this evening's agenda?
Absolutely. So I move to amend the agenda to combine items of business, items under new business. Those items are numbers 1 through 8 and 11 and 12 as a consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Bickford. Is there a second to this amendment to the agenda?
Mrs. Murray seconds.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray. Is there any discussion? Okay, then the vote is on Mr. Bickford's new amendment to amend the agenda to combine, well, actually, it's his new motion to amend the agenda to combine items under new business, items 1 through 8, and items 11 and 12 into a consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the vote. Dr. Bishop, would you
Miss-
please call the roll?
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mrs. Murray,
Aye.
Mr. Ridenhour,
Aye.
Mr. Stauffer,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Bickford,
Aye.
and Mr. Mackley.
Aye.
Okay, we have a unanimous vote with the student member concurring to accept Mr. Bickford's motion to amend the agenda. I think we're good, Dr. Michael. Are we good?
I think you are.
All right. So, that being said, we have an amended agenda and we'll move to new business with the first item of business being the consent agenda. Mr. Bickford.
President Williams, I move to approve the awards, renewals, and procurements for diagnostic and interim student assessments to Centerpoint Education Solutions at a cost of $321,315.50. Destiny Resource Manager software to Follett at a cost of $67,147. Palo Alto maintenance and support to Skyline Technology Solutions at a cost of $95,946. Chromebooks to CDWG at a cost of $3,281,150. iPads to Apple at a cost of $2,352,000, and iPad cases to CDWG at a cost of $192,000. Microsoft licenses to Bell Technologies at a cost of $548,972.02. Audiovisual equipment to Nicholas P. Papino Associates, Inc. at a cost of $56,152. Heating oil supply and delivery to James River Petroleum Company at the bid factor plus average rack price per gallon, Baltimore, Maryland terminal. Design, build, burner replacement, natural gas line installation on the Williamsport Educational Campus to Borley Mechanical Contracting, LLC at a cost of $119,000. And ice cream and freezers to Hershey Creamery Company at unit prices listed.
Thank you, Mr. Bickford. Is there a second?
Mrs. Murray seconds.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray. Is there any discussion or any questions?
Yes.
Mrs. Fisher.
In regards to item 11, the gas line at the Williamsport campus, I read today where Williamsport did not get the money to run a line. It's supposed to go under, I forget the name of the road, and I'm just wondering if that is going to affect our putting in the line at the school campus in Williamsport.
Mrs. Williams, this is Mr. Prue. I can answer that question.
Go ahead, Mr. Prue.
Last spring, the Board of Education approved during a consent agenda to contract with Columbia Gas to run that line from Sunset Avenue past the high school and the elementary school on Clifton Avenue or Clifton Drive. So the Board of Education actually paid for the extension of the line that was existing there along the cemetery on Sunset to bring the gas service to the schools. This particular job then provides the contractor to extend from the meters set by Columbia Gas into the building and to retrofit our burners. The cost payback to get into gas from our current oil services will pay back in about 7 years of service.
Thank you, Mr. Prue. Are there any other questions?
Mr. Bickford has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Bickford. I see your hand now.
Just because they're pretty sizable purchases, Dr. Michael, could you go over our new technology purchases and where that funding's coming from? Specifically the Chromebooks and the iPads.
Right. So the funding's coming from the CARES Act money being provided by the federal government, passed through to us. That money is intended to set us up and get us in good position for anything that we need to prepare for if we need to do distance learning again. So we're reaching a point where our iPads are starting to age out, operating system, those types of things will have to be upgraded in order to accommodate particularly our secondary schools. We started to make a transition to Chromebooks. North High was our pilot, and we've continued with a couple other schools. We're going to use the balance of the majority of the CARES Act money to complete our high school purchase of Chromebooks and also the rollout all the way through middle school with Chromebooks. In addition to that, we're purchasing a substantial number of iPads that'll be updated and upgraded that will distribute to particularly grades 3 through 5. And then the other iPads are still serviceable and in good shape. We'll make available pre-K through 2 for appropriate purposes. So again, we're using the CARES Act. It's a substantial replacement and a substantial shift in direction a little bit from Chromebooks to iPads for secondary schools. Students have become almost device agnostic, so they'll make a quick adjustment. Adults might take a little bit longer sometimes. We think this is going to mirror more of what we see students using after they graduate from high school. And really everything is about access to the internet at this point, in the cloud and storage and programs and things. So we're really excited about it. We have 3 different phase-in plans, depending upon when particularly the Chromebooks arrive. We won't take anything out of any school until the Chromebooks are here, and the technology department has an extensive distribution plan depending upon arrival. We could not get a guarantee arrival date until we had the Chromebooks approved tonight. That purchase will be made tomorrow. We'll sign off on everything, and we'll try to secure a delivery date. And the team has a very extensive rollout plan, depending upon what, kind of it rolls out through a whole period of time, depending upon when the Chromebooks and iPads arrive.
You anticipated my second question, which was, will they be here in time for the school year? So thank you.
Yep, there is a possibility. I mean, they're saying almost like a week or so before. It would take us into the first couple of weeks of school if they do arrive that quickly, because probably every school system in America is ordering some type of device. But right now they're saying Chromebooks they're not like available today, not the level of purchase that we have. But I'm pleased that they're only 8-10 weeks out and not, half a year away or something. So I think we'll get them here in time before our software and things age out. We'll make the transition with students, and our technology team's ready to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I'm still seeing hands raised for Mr. Bickford and Mrs. Fisher. If you want to click on those so that they disappear, that would be helpful. Okay, so if there's no further discussion, no further questions, we'll vote on the consent agenda. Dr. Bishop, would you please call the roll for the vote?
Mrs. Murray,
Aye.
Mr. Ridenhour,
Aye.
Mr. Stauffer,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Bickford,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
and Mr. Mackley.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. We have 6 affirmative votes with the student member concurring. So we'll move on now to what appears as item number 9 under new business. The consideration, emergency procurement for the board's ratification, personal protective equipment hyphen disposable mask. Is there a motion?
This is Mr. Bickford. I think I have the right motion. Correct me if I'm wrong, Scott. I move to approve the purchases of personal protective equipment to multiple vendors at the current market prices. Is that
Peter,
the-
that's number 12 or number 10.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think we had a motion in the hold on, let me pull up that file real quick.
There is a motion on that document.
Okay.
Yeah, I see it now. I apologize. So I'll change my motion to approve the emergency procurement for personal protective equipment, disposable masks.
Thank you, Mr. Bickford. Is there a second?
Mrs. Murray seconds.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray, for the second. Any questions or any discussion? Hearing none. Dr. Bishop, would you please call the roll for the vote?
Mr. Ridenhour,
Aye.
Mr. Stauffer,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Bickford,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mrs. Murray,
Aye.
Mr. Mackley.
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. I have 6 affirmative votes with the student member concurring, so the motion carries. We have approval of that item. The next item under new business is consideration of personal protective equipment purchases.
Madam President, I move to approve the purchases of personal protective equipment to multiple vendors at the current market prices.
Thank you, Mr. Bickford. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Ridenhour.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Any questions or any discussion?
Just for discussion purposes, with these 2 items, can you just explain the impact of making these purchases and what will be available?
Mrs.
So-
Williams, this is
Go ahead, Jeff.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Baker, go ahead.
So we have been, Mr. Prue, myself, the operations team, our nursing staff, the medical staff, Mrs. Howes, have been meeting and discussing, what we may need to start up school in the fall and even before that with summer school. And, just talking with vendors, as, I'm sure all of you know, just from your, everyday shopping experiences that, hand sanitizer, cleaning materials, things of that nature, the masks, they're very, the market is very fluid, and vendors will have, they'll get a shipment in, but that shipment either may be mostly spoken for, or, it's only available, until they run out, and it's first come, first serve. And, this is an interesting time, something I've never been through in the procurement world. And it is, it's going to be a struggle to make sure that if we have school starting up in the fall, that we have everything we need, in the right quantities available to both staff and students.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, we'll move to the vote. We're voting on Mr. Bickford's motion. Dr. Bishop, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Stauffer,
Yes. Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Bickford,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mrs. Murray,
Aye.
Mr. Ridenhour,
Aye.
Mr. Mackley.
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. We have 6 affirmative votes with the student member concurring. Motion carries. I think that takes care of all procurements. Am I correct in that, Dr. Michael? Please check me.
I think that's correct. We are now ready for the educational master plan of Mr. Prue and Mr. Rollins, Mr. Criswell.
Thank you. So we're looking at item number 13 under new business, the 2020 Educational Facilities Master Plan.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Board members, Dr. Michael, this is Mr. Prue. Mr. Rollins and Mr. Criswell are also on the line this evening to answer any questions you may have. This item is, of course, the approval of the Educational Facilities Master Plan. Mr. Moser, if you could put us on the next slide, please. As a reminder, what we affectionately call just the EFMP evaluates our communities to look at where we are growing, where are new developments entering the community. We look at our facility inventory to update state-rated capacities and to assess the quality and maintenance livelihood, for lack of a better term, of our buildings. What's failing, what's thriving, what's going to seek beyond its normal useful life, what's going to end before its useful life. We look at our growing enrollments or declining enrollments when we review board policies. We will remind you that this document is updated annually. And we believe we bring forward to you a fiscally responsible plan based on what we believe we can achieve through the public school construction program from financing from the state, as well as what we believe will be available from the county commissioners. As you know, they flat funded the capital improvement program at $4 million for the foreseeable future. This plan, as was presented to you at the work session several weeks ago, we made you aware that this plan was substantially different from what we have presented over the last couple of years, where we had been talking about some school consolidations, in essence, to build new schools, to save on the overall capital infrastructure. But with the funding in place that we see over the next 10 years, we don't see a window where there'll be an opportunity to do that. That's likely or not any new schools in Washington County, at least for the next 10 years, if not beyond that, based on the current funding models. But this plan is also the basis for the 5-year capital improvement plan. And so what our plan is over the next several years is to work solely on our systemic projects. And Mr. Rollins, I think I'll hand to you if you want to walk through some of these systemic projects with our board members.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, and good evening, everyone. So based on the fiscal constraints that Jeff was outlining, for the next fiscal year, this plan identifies 8 critical projects. You can see the list. There's 2 HVAC replacements, 2 electrical distribution replacements, a boiler replacement, and 3 roof replacements. As you look at that list, consider the age of the systems. 6 of them are actually original to the school's construction, and 2 of them are well beyond the normal life cycle. As the rest of the plan goes on to identify 40 more systemic renovation projects over the next years that are covered by the plan. Folks, I can't in good faith tell you that this plan meets all the needs of our students and staff. If the plan is followed as written with no renovations or replacement schools, the average age of a WCPS facility will rise to 43 years in 2030, with more than half of those schools being over 50 years in age. But I can tell you that the plan will ensure that to the best of our ability, students and staff will be kept safe and secure, they'll be kept warm in the winter, cool in the summer, and dry all year long. It's the best we can do with the money that is being given to us. So with that, I think we're here to answer any questions. And of course, we're looking for your approval to this plan so that we can forward it on to the state for their review and approval also.
This is Mr. Bickford. I have a question. Is this, are these projects ones that the state will match at a certain level? And what was that level again?
Yeah, the state will match all of these projects, and they match it at 79% of the eligible construction cost with a needed local match of 21%.
And so therefore, the fact that the commissioners giving us limited funding means the state was willing to give us a heck of a lot more money, correct?
The state generally gives us between $8 and $10 million a year. With the county funding and the type of projects we have, and depending on design costs and other things, the county money will likely not be able to match all the state money that'll be available, especially if you recall this past year, House Bill 1 was passed, which could put another $25 million available to Washington County Public Schools over the next 10 years. But if we don't have a local match, we will not be able to use it.
So the state will pay for nearly 80% of these projects as long as the county puts up about 20%.
Of the construction cost, the county still has to pick up the cost on architecture, if there's any furnishings and equipment. So soft costs like that are not covered by state funds.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
I think this is Dr. Michael. I think what's important to note is what Mr. Prue and Mr. Rollins have alluded to at this time in this this educational master plan. We'll be talking about the CIP in the fall, which is actually the funding for this. There are no new Washington County, so I think it's important to relate or know how our schools are going to quickly age. At the point they age, a lot of their infrastructure starts to fail. Even just simple things inside the building start to fail. They just wear out. And that's the concept of renovating or remodeling or constructing a replacement school. And this plan and for the foreseeable future, we just don't see a path forward for any type of thing like that. And that is not going to be feasible for long for Washington County if we're going to, maybe people come to an area based on what their schools, not only what they academically achieve, but what they look like and what they see. So I'm concerned about that. Mr. Prue, I know we've talked a little bit about money, even though this isn't a money document. This is really just the planning document. Right now, the county commissioners approved a plan, and this was pre-COVID-19. So before they do anything about COVID-19, and it wasn't officially approved, but we saw the documents, the draft documents that have since been approved that had $4 million in for the county funding for the next 10 years. I think what I saw, like a 25-year history back in the mid-1995 era for 10 years or so, wasn't during that time, 25 years ago, when the county commissioners giving us $4 million?
Dr. Michael, that's correct. If looking at the historical document that I reviewed in fiscal year 1996, so exactly 25 years ago, the county's share was $3.8 million provided to the capital improvement. And for that next decade, which ended in 2005, $44.7 million was allocated for that 10-year span. Compare that to the next 10 years, 2005 to 2014, at a time frame when the economy was bustling, but we were also investing in some of our new schools. Within that decade period, we opened think about the summer of 2008 when we opened Rockland Woods, Pangbourne Elementary, and Morgansville Elementary. Those two new buildings and Rockland being brand new. During that 10-year period, they averaged $10.8 million. So it is a shift where the county was lower in funding, grew in funding, and now they've retracted again.
So 25 years ago, and for the next 10 years coming forward, we were averaging about $3.8 to $4 million a year. I heard you say 4.4, so we're averaging 4.4 million if you count those 10 years. And we're being asked going forward to do the exact same thing we did 25 years ago with the same amount of money. And we also demonstrated as a county that we had, granted, better times than we certainly are in right now, the ability to play twice that much. And right now, we're not looking at any replacement schools or any modernization of schools indefinitely. I think it's the board. As we look at the CIP and look going forward, we're going to, I'm going to charge the staff to keep coming back keep thinking about this. What else do we do? We thought we came up with a really creative plan 2 or 3 years ago when we were heard we weren't going to be funded. We scaled our projects way back. Our hope was to replace the school year and keep our schools kind of in that 50-year range, take advantage of the state money to go ahead and brand new roof, brand new boiler, chiller, everything with a brand new school. And that plan didn't work. We went with our 3 schools, closed 7 schools and combined them in 3 new schools. Now there's not funding for that. So now we're down to this plan, but this plan is not sustainable. And I can't in good conscience indefinitely support the plan. So I'll be asking staff to continue to be creative and look for other mechanisms that might require some pretty drastic measures. of what we might have to do in the future to make this all work. But, I certainly endorse the plan for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. Are there any other questions? If not, then is there a motion?
Mrs. Williams, I move to accept the facilities master plan as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Is there a second?
Mrs. Fisher seconds.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Any questions, any discussion before we take the vote? Dr. Bishop, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Bickford,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mrs. Murray,
Aye.
Mr. Ridenhour,
Aye.
Mr. Stauffer,
Aye.
Mr. Mackley.
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. I have 6 affirmative votes with student member concurring. Motion carries, so we do have approval of the 2020 Educational Facilities Master Plan. At this time, we'll move to our next agenda item, which is Food and Nutrition Services, the fiscal year 2021 operating budget. Mr. Jeffrey Prue, Chief Operating Officer, and Michael Embley, Supervisor of Food and Nutrition Services, will be presenting. Gentlemen.
Thank you again, Mrs. Williams, members of the board, Dr. Michael. It's our pleasure this evening to present you the food service budget for FY21. It's been a tumultuous year for the department. As you can see on the slide that's presenting now, so many things are still playing into as variables for the FY21 budget. So as Mr. Embley and I really discussed this process, are schools open or closed? Are we full or partial in terms of our opening? What does enrollment look like? If we are on an opening, are we operating on A and B days, ABCs, some schools in virtual by grade? What does the meal service model look like? Are we able to serve in a classroom as opposed to in a cafeteria? That will impact the number of meals that are served on a given day, on a given daily basis. Are we continuing with mobile meals? So if we have some students in school and some students still at home, working in a virtual or blended model, we still may be required to provide community meals, which may also require additional staffing. What's happening with our after-school meal programs? That's been a growing program over several years that will also depends on whether we're in school, not in school. Free and reduced meal eligibility is also a great impactor to the budget. What we do know is that statewide right now, families receiving the SNAP benefits, which is also used to be known as the food stamp program, is up 300% statewide. Some jurisdictions higher than others. I think I saw this week that Washington County was up about 163%. Reimbursement rates vary. The reimbursement rates that we're currently operating under and have since March are the summer rates. That's the emergency and summer meal rate program are higher than the school meal reimbursements. So that impacts the budget, as well as what federal program waivers are extended or continued to be offered from the federal government, which has allowed us to do multiple meals in one setting, to service areas of our community that are not normally eligible for the summer meals program. So all of those things played in, and what we really came to in consultation with Dr. Michael was that we really can't create a budget with all of those. So we've opted to create you a budget that is on the assumption of we're here, students are all here, we're sort of back to normal, because that's the baseline. For comparison purposes, that's the baseline of what we're used to. And at this point, I think I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Embley. I just made him a doctor. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Embley to talk you a little bit through the ideologies behind this year's budget in terms of meal pricing, and to give you a sense of where we are with expenditures and revenues moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Prue. Good evening, everyone. And here, this current slide, you will see the current meal prices for WCPS and our neighboring counties. As you can see, we're well in line with other counties and even have a little bit of room for increases in our lunch prices. However, due to the current economic situation, we really don't feel that now is a time to seek a price increase. And I'll walk through the budget document. The next slide, please. You have a copy of the budget document in front of you, and this is a graphic show of the planned expenditures. And again, food and labor continue to be a lion's share of our budget. Always has been. This is typically standard for the industry. If we go to the next slide, we'll look at revenues. And again, as Mr. Prue outlined, there's so many variables that we're going to be faced with. This assumes a fairly normal year. 67% of our total revenue comes from federal sources. Again, that has been consistent with our budget for many years and will continue to be as well in the future. If we go to the next slide, this will outlay the equipment investments that we've put back into the schools in the last 9 years. This has been something that's been a high priority for us for a number of years. It's extremely important for us to continue to replace outdated and inefficient equipment, as we've done a great job with that over the past few years. And one of the things that we've been focusing on and looking into technology with water treatment systems, and really protecting our investments when we're investing, especially in any equipment that has water and electricity. Treating your water properly coming in has been a huge benefit for us. And the last slide, fast forward to the next slide. Again, we're presenting a balanced budget, a little over $12 million based on a normal school year. I think it's important to note, prior to COVID-19, the Food Service Department was projecting another financially solid year. We've been financially prudent and built a fund balance to ensure the stability and longevity of the department. Again, as Mr. Prue pointed out, many variables with this budget. And I think where we got is we will be prepared to adjust and adapt to whatever lies ahead. I feel really confident that we can continue to provide nutritious meals to the students of Washington County, whether that's in our school buildings or at community sites. We're still going to be there for the kids. And with that, we're here to answer questions and ultimately seek your approval of FY21 Food and Nutrition Services budget.
And Mrs. Williams, if I may, again, I think Mr. Embley mentioned it. You have a copy in your packet of the line-by-line budget that shows the budget for the current year, what we anticipated our end of the year would look like had we not been hit with COVID-19, what the actual anticipated is with COVID-19, as well as the budget moving forward. And I would be remiss, I think, during this period when we're talking about food and nutrition services, if from my chair I didn't thank Mr. Embley and his team for being ready right at a moment's notice. When we got notice from the governor and from Dr. Salmon on March 12th that we were, closing 24 hours later, and then within days, I think it was Tuesday of the following week, 4 days later, we had mobile meals mobilized, for lack of a better term, and serving meals to our neediest families out in the community. And they continued to do that out in the front lines every day. And I want to make sure they hear my greatest thanks as we talk about the department.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prue. Thank you, Mr. Embley. Is there a motion?
Madam President, this is Mrs. Fisher. I would like to move to approve the proposed FY 2021 Food and Nutrition Services operating budget.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Is there a second?
This is Mrs. Murray. I second.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray. Any questions, any discussion before we move to the vote? Okay, hearing none. The motion is to approve the Food and Nutrition Services FY 2021 operating budget. Dr. Bishop, would you please call for the vote, or call the roll for the vote? Thank you.
Mr. Bickford,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mrs. Murray,
Aye.
Mr. Ridenhour,
Aye.
Mr. Stauffer,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Mackley.
Aye.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. I have 6 affirmative votes with the student member concurring. We have approval of the Food and Nutrition Services FY 2021 operating budget. Thank you. At this time, we'll move to the superintendent's report. Dr. Michael?
Thank you, Mrs. Williams, members of the board, community. A number of just updates here this evening. First of all, I'd like to thank our community for the cooperation during our graduation ceremonies. 8-10 weeks ago when all this mess started, we had no idea what graduation might bring. We were still hoping that we would have, our standard traditional graduation. We came up with 3 or 4 or 5 plans. And last week we had virtual graduation happen, which was online in the evening. I thought that the students and the schools did an excellent job at that. All week on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, many of the schools had their family celebrations where students could bring 4 guests and cross their stage in their auditorium or location there within their building, or the Maryland Theater in the case of Barbara Ingram and others. And then lo and behold, the governor allowed us to have an outdoor ceremony, which somewhat resembled traditional graduation, although we had to keep it abbreviated and limit the number of people. But all that took a great deal of work. I want to thank our principals, our teachers that came out, our counselors. Again, I want to thank the cooperation of the community, the parents, the students, to make that all happen on short notice. I do apologize to parents that we just did not have an extended calendar to continue to lengthen the time period of graduation. We moved pretty quickly with that. But again, I did want to thank all of our people that made that possible. And most of all, we wish our seniors well in their future. We hope we well prepared them for what will come in store for them for the future. Yesterday was our last day for teachers, officially for the calendar year last year. And I do want to thank them as well for their patience, their flexibility, their continued commitment to our students during what I now I'm seeing referenced as crisis distant learning. On a dime, we turned from, our face-to-face learning, which we're very comfortable with and work to continue to improve, to distance learning. And I just can't thank our staff enough for their cooperation again. It's tremendous effort. It's not everything that we wanted to be for students, and we'll work on another plan if we get back in a situation like that, but I just can't thank them enough for their efforts this past year. ESP, teachers, administrators, everybody. Today, we kicked off our summer learning, which is virtual summer learning opportunities with our Summer Learning Summit, United in Practice Summit. We had 514 teachers that by a couple minutes after 8 this morning had signed in to participate in the summit. It was amazing to be there in the room as teachers were kind of reading the format and we're signing in one by one. One of our staff members was kind of announcing there was 100 people signed in, 200, 300, and up to 514 this morning just in a few minutes. So thank you for participating in that. That goes on all week. Our supervisors involved in that will be working on Friday as well. I just think, again, I want to thank our teachers for that. Throughout the summer, we have more than 150 workshops. We have 3,000 registrations for that. So obviously some of that is the same teacher multiple times. But again, I thank our teachers for continuing to hone their craft. A lot of this work will be getting us ready for fall, whether we are face-to-face or whether we're virtual. We want to be assured that our curriculum is well aligned to the needs of our students. And obviously the other PD that helps our instructional part, again, will be pivotal in preparing our students for their future, again, whether we're face-to-face, distance learning, or some combination thereof. In addition to yesterday being the teacher's last day, today is the first day for high school, summer school. We're using Apex Tutorial. It's a rigorous course work to earn 1 credit over the next several weeks. We have almost 1,100 students enrolled, which is a record number for us for summer school. I hope students aren't thinking it's what we just completed a few weeks ago. This is a very rigorous effort to earn a high school credit, and our teachers can be there to support you. Our middle school program and end of school year, our ESY program begins on July 13th. If things continue to improve in the area, we intend to have these face-to-face, with the exception of those students that may have medically fragile needs, and we'll certainly work with them. Our elementary program is set to start the end of July. Again, we're hoping that will be face-to-face. We'll continue to monitor things and make sure that that'll be a safe environment for our students. Right now, the state guidelines do allow us to have as many as 15 students in a room, as long as we practice other safe social distancing efforts. I know everyone's anxious about the fall, but before we kind of talk about that for a moment, I do want to ask Dr. Bishop to kind of bring a conclusion to our COVID-19 task force that I asked her 10 or 12 weeks ago to kind of coordinate for me. We were consistently getting conflicting information. Unfortunately, we continue to get conflicting information. But Dr. Bishop was able to, any way she chose to do this, I asked her to kind of keep us on pace for closing out the school year, for preparing us for summer, and kind of just start outlining what we might need to do for the fall. So Dr. Bishop, if you just take a minute to provide an update to everybody, please.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Michael, and good evening, board members. As of today, the Students First COVID-19 Task Force has concluded their work determining a variety of ideas and considerations for the superintendent regarding the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on student learning. Since my last update at the May 19th business meeting, the task force has expanded from the original 40 members to now 50 team members, and we've added a committee for Marshall Street and life skills to discuss the special needs of medically fragile students. Over the last few weeks, the Students First COVID-19 Task Force has discussed the 3 phases of Phase 1, ready to learn at home during working period 4, Phase 2, retain learning over the summer, and Phase 3, re-enter learning at school starting the new school year. The business meeting report that I gave last month focused on Phase 1 and Phase 2, so this report will summarize Phase 3. I'll begin with the new subgroup. The Special Education Committee focused specifically on the needs of students at Marshall Street School and medically fragile students in our life skills programs in schools across the school system. The committee emphasized the needs for personal protective equipment for students with medical needs and staff working with medically fragile students. Ideas like face shields instead of masks for some students with respiratory issues or breathing tubes may need to be considered based upon their physician's orders. Face masks, shields, gloves, and gowns will also need to be available for special education staff who change feeding tubes, wipe saliva, and help diaper students or assist with restroom use. Health and safety precautions are heightened for our medically fragile students, but there is also a heightened need for them to return to developmentally appropriate learning at their school. The special education team also discussed the needs of parents during distance learning and the transition back to school. Updates to the website, additional videos, and more resources are recommended for parents to help their children during distance learning. For example, some suggestions included creating how-to guides on setting up a classroom environment in your home, schedules for distance learning that work with multiple children, and model lessons to help children with homework would all be beneficial for parents. The need to share information and details regarding health protocols and cleaning procedures will also be very important to communicate to parents with videos and newsletters so that medically fragile students and their families all feel safe and comfortable returning to school. Over the last few weeks, the task force has discussed ideas and questions regarding Phase 3, re-enter learning at school and starting the next school year. Many unknowns still exist regarding what health precautions and safety procedures will be required, but WCPS is preparing for students to return to school in August and start the 2020-2021 school year. Face coverings have been purchased and provided to staff. School buildings are cleaned. Safety signs are displayed with reminders of social distancing, and adjustments are being made to the curriculum. Schools will be ready to open with plenty of hand sanitizers, touchless thermometers, and disposable masks available. The task force discussed cashless food service systems, eating in classrooms, and single choice food options. The discussion surrounding bus transportation included cleaning seats between runs, seating arrangements of 1 student per seat, or distancing 6 feet apart, and limits on the number of passengers per bus. Students and staff may need to have their temperatures checked to start the school day. Classrooms may also look different with fewer items in the rooms, separated desks, and students not sharing supplies. Students and staff will need to sanitize or wash their hands more often, and bathrooms will need to be cleaned more frequently. Students may also stay with the same students in the same room for more than one class, as transitions may need to be limited to only once or twice a day instead of students going to multiple rooms with different students. The traditional daily schedule may change to reduce the number of students in contact together. Concerns were expressed whether students and staff would return to school, but I think we have all had our worries reduced a little bit as more businesses, restaurants, retail centers, and even daycare providers are reopening now. The biggest questions, though, are still unanswered. Whether the school year will resume with all students and staff, if the capacity of school buildings and class sizes will be limited with reduced numbers allowed in attendance, or some other combination. The task force recommends the return of all students, but if the number must be reduced as a health precaution, then our priority should be the return to school of primary students, as well as subgroups, including special education, English learners, and below grade level readers. If the return to school must be staggered, then the task force suggests that elementary students should return to school first, while perhaps secondary students remain on distance learning for a short period of time. If class sizes are reduced and students will only be able to attend a few days a week, then the task force discussed A-day, B-day schedules. We even discussed dividing students alphabetically to try to help families with children in different schools to keep track of their schedule more easily. Other ideas were to allow Wednesday as a school cleaning day so that A students attended on Monday and Tuesday, and then B students attended on Thursday and Friday. The task force also discussed how students at home could participate in class with their peers using live video conferencing or other live broadcast methods. Some teachers on the task force suggested their schedules could alternate between distance learning and classroom instruction classes. These staggered schedules or partial returns may be inconvenient for both families and our schools, and certainly much more planning and preparation is needed, as Dr. Michael has already discussed. On the other hand, if the governor moves to phase 3 of his recovery plan, then WCPS should consider all options. For example, we've noticed colleges in the area have even opened earlier than planned by a week or two. So at this time, the work of the Students First COVID-19 Task Force has now concluded as a group to generate ideas, suggestions, and just really try to think of every single detail or option. For reopening schools, page 5, number 3 of the June 2020 Maryland Together, Maryland's Recovery Plan for Education from MSDE requires that local school systems must establish a recovery plan stakeholder group that's representative of their schools and community. The recovery plan stakeholder group will begin their work soon to create a recovery plan for reopening schools. However, I would take a moment, as this task force would like to suggest to future recovery plan groups and stakeholder groups to continue to focus first on our students' learning, because the education of children is the #1 priority of Washington County Public Schools. Meeting the educational and emotional needs of our children, providing all students with equitable opportunities for their future, thinking about how each child learns best and reaches their maximum greatest potential, and considering how our schools will operate through the eyes of a student was the focus of this task force, and I hope that our students remain the focus of our future work groups and plans. So in concluding this work, I'd like to thank the input of all 50 members on the 5 different task force teams for their many ideas and engaging conversation. The Students First COVID-19 Task Force would not have been possible without the team leaders, and I personally like to thank Dr. Pugh, Mr. Prue, Dr. Palmer, Dr. Akers, and Ms. Stair for their time and commitment. I also recognize the leaders of WCTA and WCESP for their weekly conversations with senior leadership regarding their needs and the wants of the employee bargaining units. Last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank Dr. Michael for his vision to form a task force. You realize before one was even required by MSDE, he had a task force started in order to help advise him in the many decisions and the countless details associated with this pandemic and our school closure. His tireless leadership throughout this crisis has been incredibly courageous, and we're all very thankful that Dr. Michael is our superintendent and our hardworking leader here in Washington County. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop, and thank you for those kind words. I certainly didn't expect that, but I too want to thank our team there. Again, I kind of turned this over to Dr. Bishop to take it wherever she needed to, just to kind of keep us informed and keep us going. I'm glad we got that group pulled together. I think it ended up being 60 plus different people had pieces and parts and just keeping us moving throughout the spring. A lot of people, recognizing how complicated this has been. And it's through leadership like Dr. Bishop and the many people she's had on this team and the other leaders that she just mentioned that's kind of kept us going to this point. So now we're ready to move forward from here. We do need to formalize a recovery plan for the state. It's a plan that now, it did have 10 non-negotiables, and as things change, it now has 13 non-negotiables. I wouldn't be surprised to see that continue to change throughout the summer. Our primary focus we want to have is obviously on the well-being of our students. So that social emotional piece of our students, as well as student learning. And maybe different than many other areas, that's where we plan to start. So our curriculum work is off and running, and we'll continue to look at what we believe is essential by grade level. We think that's our primary focus, whether we, again, are face-to-face or if we are in some form of distance learning. The how to do that, if we are distance learning, is going to be a big focus of what we need to do here in the short term. So I envision some small teams, so maybe pre-K to 2, pre-K to grade 1 teachers meeting, talking about the different needs of their students, how it might look different for distance learning than maybe grades 3 to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 12, and certainly by subject areas in some cases, including even AP classes, how they might look different on distance learning if that's the route we have to go. But our primary focus will be on helping children, again, social and emotionally, get back in the swing of school, again, whether it's distance learning or whether we're face-to-face, and then on student learning. That is what we're here for. That will be our primary focus, is our student first concept here in Washington County Public Schools. I do envision stakeholders absolutely being involved, as Dr. Bishop described. We'll have opportunities to provide feedback on the plan, to participate in various subcommittees. Again, they might be very short term and might culminate into a larger group of a written document as we pull together these 13 non-negotiables. I see senior leadership members will be kind of chairs or co-chairs of various components of these 13 non-negotiables. And Dr. Pugh has volunteered to be our author of the final document when we get all the pieces pulled together. Our plan board members at this point is to bring you either a draft or maybe a near finished document at the first board meeting in August. And again, the document is to be posted by August 14th to our website, sent to the state boards, MSDE, for just review. It does not require their approval. We're also to make sure we use an equity lens as we develop our plan, and we're thinking about all of our students, and that's absolutely a primary component of anything that we do here in Washington County. So thank you again to the task force for their early work before we even knew we needed the task force. And again, I look forward to the work that will come up here in the coming weeks as we develop our plan for August 14th, and hopefully what will be a traditional return to school on August 31st, if not sooner. I don't know that that can happen, but certainly something worth considering. I appreciate the task force suggesting that. Shift gears a little bit. I had the opportunity to visit Tech High this week. Amazing work has gone on there. As you know, we've kind of been renovating one small space at a time. So we're making room for our advanced manufacturing engineering academy there, also our artificial intelligence cloud computing program. So 4 or 5 different areas are being renovated to moving classrooms, to creating these engineering spaces. They are going to be fantastic, very modern looking. And I look forward to a grand opening of that facility here in the near future. I do want to remind parents, we still have our summer meal program. It did not end at the end of school. We actually just picked up on our traditional summer meal program, and information about that is on our website, or you can get information by contacting any of your local schools. And Mrs. Williams, I think that's all I have at this time. Thank you.
Dr. Michael. At this time, we'll move to personnel action. Dr. Bishop?
Yes, good evening, Mrs. Williams, Dr. Michael, and board members. As discussed earlier in closed session, there are several staff changes for your review tonight. At this time, I ask for your approval of today's personnel actions.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Is there a motion, please?
Madam President, I move to accept the personnel actions discussed earlier in the day.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. Is there a second?
Mrs. Fisher seconds.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Any discussion or any questions?
Think what?
Okay, I'll call for the vote and do the roll call. Mrs. Fisher?
Aye.
Mrs. Murray?
Aye.
Mr. Ridenour? Mr. Ridenour?
Yes.
Mr. Stauffer?
Aye.
Williams? Aye. Bickford?
Aye.
Thank you. I have 5 affirmative votes.
I think
Motion
Ms.
carries.
Fine.
Mr. Ridenour, are you there?
Yes, ma'am, finally. Aye.
Thank you. I have 6 affirmative votes on the personnel action. So the motion carries and those actions have been approved. Thank you all.
Mrs. Williams, if I could have a moment here of personal privilege, I'd like to make some announcements regarding staff changes.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have a number of changes on staff changes this evening. This is our kind of our annual time when we do make some moves in our particular school system out in our schools. That information can be found on our website here over the next hour or so. But some new people that will be joining us, or at least one new gentleman will be joining us. Mr. Michael Stauffer will be our Director of Maintenance and Operations starting here in July. Dr. Pugh will assume the role of Associate Superintendent for Administration and Leadership. Dr. Gary Willow, will assume the role of Associate Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction. Mr. Chris Klein is going to be the new principal at Smithburg High School. Amanda Mullaney will be the principal at Hancock Middle Senior High School. Elementary principal assignments this year, Mr. Eric Meredith will be principal at Boonesboro Elementary School. Susie Winters will be the principal at Cascade Elementary School. Shelley Guest will be the principal at Clear Spring Elementary School. Dan Fowler, the principal at Eastern Elementary School. Dr. Bishop, principal at Greenbrier Elementary School. Jennifer Scarberry Price, principal at Hancock Elementary School. Mr. Matt Wagner, principal at Hickory Elementary School. Mr. Andy Ketzel will be principal at Old Forge Elementary School. And Christy Baked will be principal at Pangbourne Elementary School. So just wanted to make those announcements. I know the community is always interested in the principals and other leadership positions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. At this time, we'll move to reports to the board. Are there any committee chairs that would like to make a report or to make an announcement? Mrs. Fisher.
Yes, due to the virus, obviously, most committees have not been meeting, including the policy committee. We are going to attempt to resume our meetings in August. Hopefully at the next board meeting in July, I will have a more specific date for that and a rough agenda as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Anyone else? Mrs. Murray.
Yes, Mrs. Williams, Curriculum and Instruction will plan a meeting probably either in late July or in August.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray. Anyone else? I think I have everyone. Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move to miscellaneous business. You have a rather lengthy list of future agenda items in your packet. I have 11 items here. I'm certainly not going to read all of them, but they take us through August, September, October, and November. Do you have any questions about any of those items? Most of them are updates and reports to the board about various programs and services. If you have an agenda item that you would like to see placed on the agenda of an upcoming meeting, please let a member of the Agenda Planning Committee know, and we'll take care of getting that taken care of. Also, under miscellaneous business, we have consideration of the appointment of our board's representative to serve on the Maryland Association of Boards of Education's Legal Services Association Board. We will offer the name of a representative and an alternate. I have a letter here I'd like to read to you before we have a motion and a vote. As a member of the MABE Legal Services Association, the Board of Education of Washington County is entitled to be represented on the LSA Board of Directors. The LSA Board of Directors consists of one director and one alternate director from each of the 23 LSA member boards. Directors and alternates are appointed by their boards and serve 2-year terms. Boards may appoint board members, superintendents, attorneys, or school system employees to serve as directors and alternates. It may be wise to name one staff member and one board member to achieve balanced representation, but the choice is yours. The LSA director is responsible for attending all LSA meetings to vote on matters which arise, including dues and financial litigation, support for member boards. The alternate should fill in for the director upon necessity. The LSA Board of Directors meets 4 times a year at the MABE office in Annapolis or at a designated alternative location. So at this time, the term of office of our current LSA director, Mr. Anthony Trotta, and our alternative director, that would be me, expires on June 30th. So at this time, we'd like to have a nomination made for a new director and alternate director for a 2-year term that begins July 1st, 2020. Is there a motion?
This is Mr. Bickford. I move to nominate our staff attorney, John Martirano, as the main representative, and our school board president, Melissa Williams, as our alternate.
Thank you for your motion. Mr. Bickford, is there a second?
This is Mrs. Murray. I second.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray. So we have, is there any discussion or any questions before we move to the vote? Mrs. Fisher, do you have your hand up, or is that from an earlier? Okay, thank you. Thank
Sorry.
you. No, not a problem. Any questions or any discussion regarding Mr. Bickford's motion? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the vote. Dr. Bishop, would you please call the roll for the vote?
Yes. Mrs. Murray,
Aye.
Mr. Ridenhour,
Aye.
Mr. Stauffer,
Aye.
Mrs. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Bickford,
Aye.
Mrs. Fisher,
Aye.
Mr. Mackley.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. I have 6 affirmative votes and the student member concurs. So congratulations and thank you to Mr. Martirano for taking on the job of being our representative to the LSA board. That concludes our miscellaneous business. At this time, we'll move to board member comments. Mr. Bickford, would you like to begin? We'll go alphabetically.
No comments from me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Fisher.
I have nothing.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Murray.
I just want to say thank you to all of the school principals, school staff, and the staff at the CES for the wonderful graduation ceremonies that took place. I don't think under the circumstances that they could have done it any better, and I want to thank them for everything that they've done for the class of 2020.
Thank you, Mrs. Murray. Mr. Ridenhour.
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stauffer.
I would just echo what Mrs. Murray just said.
Thank you, Mr. Stauffer. I too would like to echo what Mrs. Murray said. Mr. Mackley.
Yeah, with today being my last board meeting, I just wanted to say thank you, colleagues, for supporting me throughout these last 2 years. Thank you for supporting the student voice and all the students of Washington County. This journey's been just a great experience for me, and I'm so grateful for it. And obviously, this isn't how I ever thought it would end, but I'm really grateful. Grateful for your support along the way. I want to especially thank my county student government advisor, Mr. Jesse Orth, for always being there for me, developing me as a student leader. He's really the reason that student leadership is so strong in this county, and he's the reason why I'm in this role to begin with. I also want to thank Dr. Michael and all my colleagues for their incredible leadership, especially over the last couple months. And moving forward, I hope this board will continue to value the student voice more to best serve all the students in all their educational experiences and needs. And I especially hope that you will welcome our new student member, Kevin Bocoum, as you did for me. As I've introduced him before, he's a sophomore at North High, which means he'll have the opportunity to run for a second term like I did. And I know that his experience in advocacy and student council will help him thrive immediately. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you all from the bottom of my heart for this experience.
Thank you, Chris. And Chris, thank you. Thank you for your diligence and for being such a wonderful voice as the representative for our students. And we wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Dr. Michael, do you have anything you would like to add before we adjourn?
Well, certainly want to wish Chris the best. I had the opportunity to be at graduation with him. Just a tremendous young man. He's going to be a fantastic leader one day, or is already, but he's going to continue to grow in his leadership. I am confident he's got a bright, bright future ahead of him. I know his parents are very proud of him, and it's been a pleasure to work with him this closely over the last couple of years. So wish him well. Again, I wish all of our students have a great summer. Our seniors the very best of luck, and thank you to all of our staff for what's been a very memorable year, and let's hope we're looking for something very different and very positive in the future.
Well said. Thank you.
The chat says that our president left the conversation. I'm sure she didn't mean to.
Mr. Stafford, you want to take over? And I think I saw Miss Murray's hand up. I don't know if that's up from another time, but she might have a comment.
No, that was an accident. Sorry.
Mr. Stafford, maybe you could adjourn our meeting then if there are no other
As
comments.
far as I know, the meeting is adjourned then.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you all.